After wishing everyone Boker Tov, Chodesh Tov, Miktzas HaYom KeKulo, a fascinating sugya that has implications all over the show, as they say. And we have it here in Nazir in two different sugyas, but it really sort of accompanies us throughout the first two prakim of Masechet Nazir. And we have it in Avelus, we have it in Sfir Zayin Nekiyim, in a Zava, after she gets to the seventh day of Zayin Nekiyim, and she observes the beginning of the day. In the case of Avelus, he observes one part of the day as Shiva in the morning, and then that's counted as the seventh day of Shiva. And so we have this principle called Miktzas HaYom KeKulo. He writes here that Im Kiyem Eschavaso B'Meshech Tzas Shel HaYom, he says, if,
my fault.
Wow, in this weather, call on. You guys get a special prize. So he was Mekayim his chiyuv in Miktzas HaYom, and it's considered as if he was Mekayim his chiyuv for the entire day. Now we're going to spend our time here addressing two different questions. Question number one is, if we understand that Miktzas HaYom KeKulo, why is it that sometimes we do apply that halacha and sometimes we don't? Is there some sort of a K'nei midah, some sort of a criterion, so that we should know when we do press the button and apply Miktzas HaYom KeKulo and when we do not? And that's going to be a reflection of another issue about whether or not Miktzas HaYom KeKulo is a svara or it's a pasuk. Is it something derived from a alfusa? We'll see Xer Shava according to some of the shitos, and according to others, the Radbaz at the head of it, it's just a svara. It's a logical deduction. Thank you so much. I just want to say shkoch to everyone who came today in this weather. Kol hakavod. Another issue that we're going to try to discuss today in Mitzvah Hashem, we'll split our time. We'll call it Roman numeral number 2. That'll be about how Miktzas HaYom KeKulo works. So I'm going to show that there are two different ways that it operates. And that's going to be largely based on Rabbi Chanan. And when I say Rabbi Chanan here, I have to be careful, because what I mean is Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, right, who died in the Shoah, was killed in the Shoah, as opposed to one of the Bali Atosis by the name of Rabbi Chanan, who's going to play a major role today in terms of Miktzas HaYom KeKulo. So my second name is Elchanan. That was my grandfather's name. So Elchanan is a major name today, whether it's Bali Atosis, Rabbi Chanan, or whether it's Rabbi Chanan who lived in the 20th century. Be that as it may, where do we find Miktzas HaYom KeKulo that applies in Avelus? For example, we said that he starts the seventh day of his Shiva and he observes Miktzas HaYom. And the question is, what happens at the end of Yud Beis Chodesh, right? We know that for a parent, there's an Avelus of a full year. What happens on the day at the end of the 12-month period? Is there Miktzas HaYom KeKulo or not? And it seems that the way the halacha has been accepted, there's no Miktzas HaYom KeKulo at the end of the 12 months. So we're going to apply Miktzas HaYom KeKulo at the end of the Shiva, but not at the end of the 12 months.
What does that mean that you don't have it at the end of the 12 months?
Then, in other words, in the last day of the 12 months, if he was, let's say he was monea himself from going into
Nihugi
Avelus, yet he's going to have to continue his Nihugi Avelus for the entire day. We're not going to let him get off.
You're not asking the question of whether we need Me'es La'es, the exact time of the day.
Well, again, Me'es La'es is all part of our discussion today. And if we get to the last day of the 12 months, then if we suspend the principle of Miktzas HaYom KeKulo, then you could call it Me'es La'es for that last day. Okay. Now, it's really interesting. He points out here, and this article is magnificent because he collected tshuvas from, I don't know where, I don't even recognize half the names of the tshuvas that he's quoting. How he got this together is amazing. And the encyclopedia didn't get up to Miktzas HaYom KeKulo yet. But anyway, on the bottom right, he shows you that within one halach itself, you can have Miktzas HaYom KeKulo and reject Miktzas HaYom KeKulo. For example, he says that with regard to Ziva, you apply Miktzas HaYom KeKulo, but only with regard to the din of Tefillah. That means that according to the Doraisa halacha, she's allowed to be Toveles on the morning of the 7th day of Zayin Nikiyah. But yet, in Ras Adam Ad Halayla, this is the Shitas Chachamim, we'll see that Rabbi Yossi disagrees, and that's also Sugya here of Masechet Nazir, that she sees a Re'iyah during the balance of that day, after she counted it as a Yom Naki in the morning of the 7th day, then it's Soseres, which means that she has to start from the beginning. And we're not going to apply Miktzas HaYom KeKulo. Or, for example, even within Avelus, we said that the 7th day of Avelus in Shiva lends itself to Miktzas HaYom KeKulo. And yet, there's a halacha of Iser La'achos Es Hakriya, that for the balance of the 7 days of mourning, she's not allowed, or he's not allowed to re-sow the kriya and put it back to what it was before the kriya. And here we're going to say that when he gets to the 7th day, you would have thought that Miktzas HaYom KeKulo, and after he observes the beginning of the 7th day, he could already sow up his kriya, and that's not so. We're not going to apply Miktzas HaYom KeKulo to the law of kriya. So that's why Miktzas HaYom KeKulo is a very tricky kind of halacha. You never know when it does apply, when it doesn't apply. And even when it does apply, it only applies relative to certain dinim and not relative to others. In fact, he says there's a major machlokes between Rashi and Tosfos about the issue in Psachim Daf Pei Aleph. I think you're up to it now, about whether or not we apply Miktzas HaYom KeKulo at night. Rashi says we do apply Miktzas HaYom KeKulo at night because the day is a 24-hour period. And the Tosfos say, no, we only apply Miktzas HaYom KeKulo in the morning, but not at night, just to complicate matters. Now, in Masechet Nazir, you'll see here on the bottom left, this seems to be the source in Shas for Miktzas HaYom KeKulo, and as we'll see soon, perhaps the source in general for the halacha Miktzas HaYom KeKulo is right here in Nazir. So what's the case in Nazir? Stam Naziris requires 30 days. He gets to the 30th day. He's got to wait till the 31st day in order to be Megaleach and bring his karbonos. So he needs 30 full days of the observance of Naziris. But what happens if he went ahead on day 30 and he was Megaleach Sa'aro and he brought his karbonos? The Gemara says that in such a case, he was Yotze and his Naziris terminates. So Gemara says, why? Again, this is the sheet of Rav Masna. That's called Miktzas HaYom KeKulo. So we see that in Nazirus, once he observes the morning of day 30 as a Nazir, meaning he abstains from cutting his hair, then it's considered as if he was Mekayim that day in its entirety. And Miktzas HaYom KeKulo has already been mashlim in his Nazirus, and hence his karbanos are valid. So that's the real source for Miktzas HaYom KeKulo. Now, we find this halacha of Miktzas HaYom KeKulo also with regard to Kohen. A Kohen, if he leaves his hair growing more than a month, is enjoined from doing the avodah. He's not allowed to do the avodah. What happens if on day 30 he abstains from taking a haircut? Do we say that that's considered as if he hadn't taken a haircut the entire 30 days? And here we're going to apply, you'll see this on the bottom of the page, that Tekef Yigdal Sa'aro ad Bokro Shel Yom HaShloshim Yad Shehir HaShachar Shel Yom HaShloshim Nechshav Shegidol Pera Gadal Pera V'Seir V'Rosho. In other words, already on the morning of day 30, when his hair is growing, yes, he had taken a haircut, he already becomes enjoined from doing the avodah. So we're going to apply Miktzas HaYom KeKulo L'chumra, such that now there's an is. And now I want to introduce to you Rabbi Chanan, the Bali Tosfos, Rabbi Chanan, in Tosfos in Erchin on Daf Lamed Aleph. Rabbi Chanan says that we always apply Miktzas HaYom KeKulo unless there is a Gzeres HaKasuv to the contrary. So the rule is going to be Miktzas HaYom KeKulo, according to Rabbeinu Elchanan, unless we have a derivation to the opposite. And in two sugyas, both of which overlap with Erchin Daf Lamed Aleph, we have a hafka of Miktzas HaYom KeKulo, and they're both based on psukim. So therefore, Rabbi Chanan says that since you're applying psukim to undermine and vitiate the principle of Miktzas HaYom KeKulo, means that the general rule is that unless we know otherwise, to the contrary, we will apply Miktzas HaYom KeKulo. What are the two cases in which the Gemara applies a Yalfusa and derives from Yalfusa that we don't apply Miktzas HaYom KeKulo? These are the cases of Batei Arichoma and a set Tamim Zachar Lekarma in Kodshim Lemizbeach. Are you able to hear me? I don't hear myself, so I'm hoping that you hear me. Anyway, so in Batei Arichoma, the law is that if you sell a field or a bayis in a walled city, this in Parshas Bahar, then you have a zchus to redeem that field up to 12 months. If you don't exercise that option, then that sada now becomes muchlat to the lokeach, to the buyer, li'olam, and it's not subject to the law of Yovel, and it's not choser b'Yovel. What happens on the last day of the 12-month period of time in which he has the schus? Is it already muchlat if during the morning he did not exercise his schus to be poda the field? And the Gemara says no. Here we need, as Daniel said before, and you mentioned it earlier, Adam, may ace la ace. We need a full, that the last day of the 12 months be a full day.
Well, no, I mean, till the time. It was 9 a.m. in the morning, you have till 9 a.m. in the morning. You don't need the full day. You need to get till this.
But what I meant to say was that even though the morning passed and he was not poda, it's still not subject to the law of muchlat. He can still, the sada will still be choseres b'yovel, or he could be poda and be zochid. And we don't apply the principle of Miktzas HaYom KeKulo, and the Gemara bases it on a pasuk. The pasuk says Shana Tmima, and from the fact it says Shana Tmima, it means that we include the entire year, including the last day of that year of the 12-month period. And in Kodshim, again, we have a similar derivation in the Gemara in Zvachim Daf Chafei, Set Tamim, and the Torah adds the word Tamim, and then it says Ben Shana. So what does it mean, Ben Shana? So in other words, the set is only Roy La'akrava after the first year of its life. And if on the last day of the Shana, he wants to bring this set as a carbon, let's say, for example, a carbon ola, he cannot do so. Why? It's still not ready for the Mizbeach, because the Torah uses the phrase Tmima Ben Shana. So says Rabbi Chana, which you'll see at the end of this paragraph in Nechleku, that this is the rule of thumb, Miktzas HaYom KeKulo, unless the Torah says otherwise. Tosfos, on the other hand, disagrees with Rabbi Chanan in Masechet Erchin, and he says that what the Torah is telling us is that Kol Makom, that's line 3 if you see it, Shepirsha Torah Shana. Whenever the Torah uses the word Shana, then it's telling us it means Shana Tmima Meis Leis, a full year without cutting it short and abridging it and applying Miktzas HaYom KeKulo. So the machlokas between Rabbi Chanan and the other Balei Tosfos is going to be in a case where the Torah says Shana, but it doesn't say Shana Tmima or Tamim. There's no extra word. According to the Balei Tosfos, once the Torah says Shana, we derive from these two sources, that's Batei Arichoma and Kodshim, that we do not apply Miktzas HaYom KeKulo. Rabbi Chanan says, no, you need that extra Gzeres HaKosuv, a superfluous word like Tmima, in order to exclude Miktzas HaYom KeKulo.
In 8-8, in Shana Tmima, the morning of the last day is Mashlim, the partial first day from a year before. That's how it gets. Okay, is that how it becomes Tamim that way? In other words, let's say the sale was at noon of the Baider Choma. Okay, so on the first day, all the hours until noon, it wasn't sold yet. Right, and then on the last day.
So it could be that on the last day we won't apply Miktzas HaYom KeKulo, but on the first day we might apply Miktzas HaYom KeKulo.
Well, I'm just.
That's what we'll have to see exactly what Meis Leis means in that case.
Right. I'm sorry. I was just.
Just clarify here. The sale takes place on Aleph Nisan. We're talking about here the next year, not Kaftet Adar. We're talking about Aleph Nisan again.
Oh, it goes by the calendar?
No,
I don't think so.
That's what I'm asking.
Well, unless you know otherwise, I don't think so. I think it just goes by 12 months, and we have to get to the last day of 12 months at the end
What
of
does
that.
that mean? If it is it's that same day, meaning it was
If we Chavtet Adar, as he said, no?
so no. Then the issue of if you're
I
saying
think it has to be the
Me'ez
same
La'ez,
day.
you're not talking about 12 noon on Kaftet.
Right,
Me'ez La'ez would mean you have to come back to the same day you started.
Right.
and get- exactly.
so that's an issue.
But
whether or
Miktzas
not-
Yom
because you're-
KeKulo might even potentially be telling me that the morning of the day before. I feel like there's a lot of room in between the Ace La'ace and applying Miktzas Yom KeKulo. You cannot apply Miktzas Yom KeKulo, and that would just take us to the end of Kaftet Adar. You wouldn't need to wait the 12 hours until noon on Aleph.
Unless
Nisan.
it's halacha of Meisleis.
Correct. But I'm saying he's assuming here anytime you don't need, anytime there's not exeris a customer require Me'ez La'ace, that we're going to apply Miktzas Yom KeKulo. I mean, there could be a lot of room in between to not apply one and not apply the other.
I get it. Yeah, it's very high. Sorry.
Why would you say, like Rav Elchanan, that the default is Miktzas HaYom KeKulo? What do you think Misvara?
Oh, so give me one more minute. Now we get to the question: is Miktzas Yom KeKulo a svara, or is it derived from a pasuk? So he says in the next section, which is called Bays. I need a microphone here. That Yesh Omrim Miktzas HaYom KeKulo Gzeras HaKosuf. And this is in the name of the Tosa Rosh in Moed Katan Daf Yutes in the Sugya of Avelus, which is the sheet of Abba Shol that we'll get to in a few minutes. Because Abba Shol is going to say that we're going to apply Miktzas Yom KeKulo both to Shiva and to Shloshim. We'll see that in Mitzvah Hashem very soon. But first, if I stand, it's a little better. Do you hear me better if I stand?
We hear
No?
you. We hear you.
Okay. Right. All right. Now, where is this Gzeres HaKosuv? That's not clear. He has some sort of Gzeres Shava that compares Avelus to Nazir. But we don't know exactly where is the pasuk in Nazir. That's not so clear. But now we get to the Radbaz, and this I find very fascinating. The Radbaz says that Miktzas HaYom KeKulo is a svara. Like all over Shas, it says Iboy Shem Akra, Iboy Shem Svara, and svara is upgraded to the same status as a kra. And he says, Mistaber, it's logical that if there's a minyan of Yomim, and you need a certain number of days to fulfill that minyan, whatever that obligation might be, then since you sort of spilled over to that day and you were makayim your chiyuv on Miktzas HaYom, that's sufficient. So what exactly is this all about? Why is it so logical, according to the Radbaz? Rabbi said we all know when the Radbaz lived and where he lived. No? Do you mind if I review that? His name is Rabbi David Ibn Zimra. He was a prolific Meshiv. I myself own 7 volumes of his tshuvas that were published in Venice about 4 centuries ago. Baruch Hashem, it took me a long time to collect those. But it's cool. I was thinking of bringing it in, but then it started raining, so I didn't want to, it's too expensive to play games. Anyway, so the Radbaz was in Cairo. And as I said before, he wrote just prolifically. Every shiloh that came up in the whole Sephardic world was posed to him. He also wrote a commentary on the Rambam. So how does the Radbaz understand this svara? So this is the paragraph that you'll see, Aleph. The way I understand the svara of the Radbaz, it's kind of a combination of what I call physics and metaphysics. What do I mean? On a level of metaphysics, the Radbaz insists that every part of a day, every segment of a day, although you can identify it as a separate independent segment, nevertheless, it's part and parcel of one entity. And that entity is a day. Okay? So again, this is kind of like the borderline between physics and halacha. It's like the science or the philosophy of halacha. In other words, the halacha defines a yom as an entity. And the Radbaz says that any part of that day, if you kind of touch any part of the day, it's as if you touch the entire day. Why? Because it's an indivisible entity. So on the one hand, the day is broken down into its segments and its smaller parts, but the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That's called gestalt. And the whole is an entity. But the Radbaz is not satisfied with that. He wants to show you that even in the physical world, there is such a thing. And he gives an example of a base yad of a kli. So you have a utensil, right? And it has a handle. And once you lift up the handle, you lift up the entire kli, even though the handle only touches on part of the kli. So for some reason, the Radbaz feels compelled to show a paradigm in the physical universe. In any event, this is his understanding of Zman, and it is that a Yom is considered an entity, and therefore once he was Makayim his obligation at any part of the Yom, it's considered as if that Kiyum was related to the entire Yom as an entity.
People view days that way. People like someone starts working on something at night and they continue the day on the next morning. They're like, I've been working on this for 3 days. It's been less than 2 days, but people will say it's been 3 days.
In the expression of bad,
people.
But could he charge his employer for 3 days' work? I don't know. In any event. So now we're going to take a look at a sefer called the Yad Meir. If anyone has the time, I don't have the time right now to look up who the Yad Meir is. I have no clue. And he says the following. When do we apply Miktzas HaYom KeKulo, when do we not? And he divides up the universe, so to speak, into two parts. There's Gazra Torah, or Gadra Torah, when the Torah itself points out a number of days, and then there's something that is divided up into time periods based on nature. When it's I'm going to use my terminology, not his, halachic, meaning the Torah itself says that you need a number of days, then we will apply Miktzas HaYom KeKulo. When it's something dependent upon nature, then we do not apply Miktzas HaYom KeKulo, but rather me'es la'es. And let's see how he applies this on the left column here. In the case of Negoim, the Torah says Shivas Yomim. Or, for example, in Avelus, the Torah says, Vafachti chagechem le'avel, and there's an equation between Chag and Avelus. And therefore, it's as if the Torah had said in both of these cases, Shivas Yomim. So the Torah now is defining a time period. The Torah is telling us to count days, what we call a malos or a minyan. Once you have a malos, then, according to the Yad Meir, you can now apply the principle of, well, part of the day is considered a full day as far as your counting of days is concerned. But, however, in the next paragraph, he points out that certain times we count days, not because the Torah and the halacha requires that we count days, but rather because of the physical nature. For example, if we want to violate Shabbos for the sake of Yoledes, or violate Yom Kippur for the sake of Yoledes, then let's say we count 3 days since her birth. That has to do with her physical state of choli, that she's considered choli sheish bo sakana for those 3 days. We're not going to apply the principle of Miktzas HaYom KeKulo, because it takes 3 days until she gets out of this state of choli. And so too, with regard to identifying a corpse, a dead body, which decomposes, and we have halacha that we can marry off his wife if we can recognize his face, and we can only recognize the face for 3 days since the death. What's this called? Forensic medicine, I guess, right? And he says the following, that we're not going to say, well, Miktzas HaYom KeKulo, and if we get already spilled into day 3, then we can no longer be makir his panim. No, we're going to give him a full Me'es leis meaning 24 times 3. But now we have a chasam sofer. And I'm going to need your help here. That's the paragraph ubidvarim. I'm not sure if this chasam sofer is physics or biology or metaphysics. And he says the following: we could divide up diseases into two categories. There are some diseases, the healing process of which is going to be determined or generated by the sun. When the sun shines, it somehow will cause refuah. Okay, not like a day like today, right? And he says the following: if the makkah comes through either leda or through a knife, like for example in the case of Mila, then that makkah will be healed. Just 1 second. Just 1 second. Is that the case? Oh, so then we'll apply Miktzas HaYom KeKulo. Why? Because already on the third day the sun had shined, so that the impact of healing of 3 days was already achieved with sunrise on the third day. I don't know, is that physics or metaphysics? I don't know.
I mean,
It's like Hashemish Marape.
Not all minutes are equal. People sleeping, they're killing in a different way.
Looking back at the Avchana that he made between
The Yad Mayor.
Yeah, the Yad Meir. It seems that the idea of Miktzas HaYom KeKulo applies when it's something that's halacha based.
Correct.
A
The
matzah of
Torah
truma or
says
tantra,
count
something
X
like
number
that.
of days.
But the case where he says, well, Miktzas HaYom KeKulo does not apply is when it's talking about an actual physical state.
Correct. Nature. And if it's a choli,
If it's a
for
choli, that's a
example,
physical state.
right, so he would say that a leda would give her the status of a chola sheyesh bo sakana for a full 72 hours. You would not count the third day, meis leis.
But that
Comes
doesn't-
along the Chasam Sofer, and I'm not sure if it's metaphysics, and he's saying no. In the case of Leda, when the sun rises on day 3, the sun itself will bring her that refuah of the third day, and we're going to apply Miktzas HaYom KeKulo. And he's going to say the same thing with regard to Mila. We're all looking at the doc over here. You know, he doesn't want to say anything.
Is there anyone in this room?
To me, it sounds like metaphysics. I don't know. But it's amazing. You should know that based on this Chasam Sofer, we're going to be Machal Shabbos. Do you understand the significance of this? You know, either you buy into it, you don't buy into it. The Yad Meir didn't buy into it.
No, he's machmir in this case. He's cutting it less than 72 hours. So
Why? He's saying, yeah, all right. He's
cutting less than
he's not going to allow us to. Whereas the Yad Meir will say, well, we got the full
72.
Meis Leis, correct. But he says, Shara Cholim, other diseases don't depend upon the sun, and it really means a certain period of time has to pass until the body can recover from its disease. Okay. So Rabbosai, at this point, getting to the paragraph called Begeder, I would say Ad Kan HaKofa Aleph. I would have put stars here and a numeral, because now, from this point and on, the subject of our discussion changes. We're not really talking about when we do apply or when we do not apply Miktzas HaYom KeKulo, but how does Miktzas HaYom KeKulo work? And he offers 2 approaches. One is what he calls Toras Greira. We'll explain that in a minute. And then on line 3o, it's Toras Chelek Shenod Bo Moil Mitzad Atzma. Beli Greira. And personally, I'm much more impressed with the second approach, but I'll tell you why later. What are the 2 approaches? The first approach, I would say, is the following. Everybody here knows what a tris is, right? I think we call it blinds in English. I don't know, how do you translate the word tris?
they're tree
I've been in Israel too long.
They
so
don't have any
Here.
Right.
There's shutters. They're running shutters.
Shutters. Okay. So the first approach I call the shutter approach. What's the shutter approach? That once you begin to pull down the shutter, it will fall to the bottom. So it's as if the shutter already, when you start the process, has reached the floor. And that's called the entire day is included in that beginning, as if you pulled it down. You'll see the second approach, you don't even have to pull it down.
Right.
But in the first approach, you're going to pull it down as if he was Mekayim the entire thing for the entire day. I'll give you an example. Like Chazal speak about Yaakov Avinu, that there was Kfitzas Haderech. According to him, Kfitzas Haderech means that all he had to do was take that original Kfitza, and he's already at the point of destination. So we're going to stretch it out. That's what I call the tris effect, and pull it down as if he was Mekayim the entire day. The second approach says, no, forget about that. That's not what Kfitzas Haderech is all about. Kfitzas Haderech means that all he needs is that one Kfitza. He doesn't have to stretch it out as if he took the entire journey and he walked or he traveled from point X to point Y. All he needs is everything in here's in that original kfitza. It's already as if he arrived at his destination with that first kfitza. And that means that when you pull the blinds down, you don't have to pull it down to the bottom. All you have to do is just get that first pull. It's like, I once heard this from Rav Meir Schlesinger, if anybody knows who he is. So Rav Meir told me, he says, when a person takes a plane, at that time it was the Soviet Union, and he's on his way to New York, at what point is he closer to New York than to the Soviet Union? And his answer was with takeoff. That was his answer. Once the plane takes off, he's already closer to New York than he is to Brit HaMatzot of then.
Is it like
So,
Dover Shesofel Noach Kamunach Sami? Is it I guess that's a physical object, and this is Meshach Man.
no, I think Sofel Anuach means what we call Kluta Kamisha Unchud, means that if it's kolut in the Rishus, I think the Meiri is very, very famous for this, then it's as if the Rishus was collated. You don't really need Hanach al Mokum Dalad. Okay, for that we have to learn Melechah Zorek. But getting back to this concept, he's saying the following, that we don't know whether or not we need Gereira. What is Gereira? Gereira literally means pulling. Like, for example, in what we call Azlin and Basa Ruba, in the case of Taroves, so what we say is that the rove sort of swallows up the miut. Like, for example, the Rashba's famous shita that miut nasa nefach lios, isur nefach lios heter. So it means like there's like a greyer over here in which the rove is gorer the miut, and the miut becomes part of the rove. And that would be the first approach that he's offering here. That Miktzas HaYom KeKulo means we're going to stretch it down as if, again, it's halachic, a legal reality, but it's not a physical reality, but it's as if he fulfilled that obligation during the entire day. So, for example, if you take this first approach of what I call the tris approach, then if a woman was shomeres Miktzas HaYom b'nikirus, I'm talking about a zava, then it's as if she was shomeres the entire day till the end of the day. No, pugfaker.
No, it would not be.
Then it would be so. So why? Because you can only pull it down if there's nothing contradicting you. If she has a re'iyah, then how could you pull it down? You can't say that the tris reached the bottom because somebody intervened and put a ma'akiv in the middle.
Wait,
on
she
the
would be tovelis in the morning because it's Miktzas Yom KeKulo.
so Miktzas Yom
But then
KeKulo
it's
is
after.
right, exactly.
So
So the shmiras nikim she already achieved in the morning with Miktzas Yom KeKulo. But what does that shmiras nikim give me through Miktzas Yom KeKulo? It makes it as if it's a halachic assumption that she will remain Nikiya through the entire day. But she really needs Nikiyas the entire day because it's the pull-down theory, if you follow me. And now she had a stira and she saw a dam. You can't pull it down. You can't tell me that she had an entire day that was Yom Naki. But if we go with the second approach, and again, I worked very hard on this. If we go to the second approach, that in that kfitza you've already arrived at your destination. We're not pulling it down. What do you say? Then stira can't be, and this is going to be the machlokus between Rabbi Yossi and the Chachamim, whether or not a shomeres, a zava has a din of stira after we applied Miktzas Yom KeKulo. And Rabbi Yossi says there's no din of stira because Rabbi Yossi understands that already in Yiddish we have a word licht. Licht means munach b'tocho. It's already in here. What inheres in that pit is the entire day. So she had a whole day because the Torah collapses the whole day into one moment. But in the second shot, what we're saying is more what we call this is Aristotelian befal. The first pull down theory is like the befal. It's as if befal she had it, but well, that makes sense if she didn't have a stira, but if she had a stira, then you can't say the befal, she was nucky the entire day. And if you take a look at the next paragraph, he quotes another famous Meshiv, who I've never heard of, called the Siach HaSada. It's amazing for new names from nowhere. And the Siach, now again, this is very poorly written. So after working on this paragraph for about a half hour, I'm going to tell you how to make it make sense over here. He says in the name of the Siach HaSada, she'etzem ha-Miktzas moil ke'ilu b'Miktzas zeh, please underline the word zeh me'ayom, hoya kol hayom. Which approach is that? The first,
Your tris effect.
tris, or the second one?
Second.
The second approach. It's not the tris approach. Why? Because he's looking at that Miktzas HaYom and he's giving it the status of Kol HaYom. So he's folding up, he's collapsing the entire Yom into that first Kfitza, into that first Miktzas HaYom. And now you should put brackets around this because it's very confusing. And bracket the word V'eno. Again, you have it on your phone, so I don't know if you could do that. And then close the brackets 2 lines down, Meisleis, with the word Ha-Miktzas. Because now he tells you, this Seich HaSodeh, why it's not the first approach. V'eno k'agdaras rubo KeKulo sharov. Okay, I wanted to, if you like the word gorem lebiyut lihigorer, he calls it greira. I would call it blia, harov bolea liachrov es habiyut. V'kaka miksayom yigrar achrov. That's the tris theory, where he pulls down the blinds. Es sharayom kilu rov hayom hoya b'matzav shel miktzas. Very interesting. It's just the exact opposite direction as rov. And now you close the brackets and you go back to his original position, but rather the kevan shemiksayom moil ki'ilu b'miktzas zeh. Again, you have to emphasize those 2 words. B'miktzas zeh vos lichten dem miktzas is kol hayom. The entire day is in that original kfitza. Im kain shayach lomer b'yom echad gam shnei pamim miktzas hayom KeKulo b'tchiloso u'b'sofo. Okay, what's going on here? Okay, this has to do with the Shita of Rav, which he quotes here in footnote number Yud Gimel. So let's see if we could find the Shita of Rav. I believe it's on Daf Tes Vav. Let me just see. Yeah, if you have a Gemara Nazir, which would be helpful, you can open up to Daf Tes Vav. And let's see how we're doing on the clock here, because I have to time myself. Okay, so what happens in the Mishnah there? A man basically takes upon himself Nazirus, and that Nazirus is going to last for 100 days. He takes upon himself 100 days of Nazirus. But then he has another Kabbalah of 30 days. What was the other Kabbalah? That from the day that his son will be born, he'll be a Nazir for 30 days. So if you notice here, there's a certain overlap. Why? Because let's say, for example, 70 days passed and then his son was born. What's left is 30 days of Nazirus for the first Nazirus of 100 days, plus 30 days of Nazirus for the second Nazirus of Kishi Yivaled Lo Ben. And Omar Rav, if you fast forward to the Gemara, Yom Shivim Olalo Lakan Ulakan. Again, there's tremendous machlokus in how to interpret this, but we'll go with one particular approach of the Rosh, and that is that day on which his son was born, which is day number what? In his 70. First, day number 70 in his first Nazirus, that will be counted both as a Yom of his Shivim and as the first day of the second Nazirus of Kishi Yivaled Lo Ben. Which means that at the end of 100 days, he now brings his karbanos for both Nazirs, because he ends both Nazirs on the same day, 30 days after the baby was born on day 70, because day 70 is also considered a day of Kiyum Nazirs. So it comes out that according to Rav, he's Ola Lakan Ulakan, meaning he has one day which counts for both. it counts for his Nazirus of 100 days, as well as for his Nazirus of 30 days. The Siach Hasada claims that the reason for this is because we're not viewing it as if Miktzas HaYom KeKulo creates a pull-down theory in which he was Mekayim the entire day. If he's Mekayim the entire day, then decide one way or the other, it's a kiyum of this Nazirus or a kiyum of that Nazirus. But if we're going to say that Miktzas HaYom KeKulo means we could collapse the entire day into one point of time in the day, then the day is made up of many different points of time. We can have a point of the time in which we're going to say Miktzas HaYom KeKulo as day 70 of his first Nazirus, and we're going to say that Miktzas HaYom KeKulo of the rest of the day contains within it the first day of his new Nazirus of Kshivalid Aben. And this, my friends, will shed a light on the Machlokes Abba Shol and the Rabbanon, which is on page Kuf Chaf. So we were looking on Kuf Yud Ches, and now we're fast forwarding to page Kuf Chaf, and we're in the last paragraph on that page. What happens in the Sugya Nazir on Daf Tesvav, and it's also Moed Katan Daf Yud Tes? The case is the following. If a person observes part of Shiva before Yontif, then Yontif comes and it's Mevatel Shiva. If he observes part of Shloshim, which means he abstains from, let's say, cutting his hair, and then comes the regel is Mevatel Shloshim. And now Abba Shol is going to say that you can have both simultaneously. They could both happen. So if you take a look at line 3, Shmona Yomim Kodim LeRegel, Batla Mimeno Gzeras Shloshim. So okay.
You're still good. You're still.
They're getting earlier than later.
You're still internet.
No, this is.
Yeah.
Connected from your phone.
Yeah, but I need I need a little bit of a flash.
Easier to hear you now.
What do you say? All right. So I'm going to use this flashlight. I mean, if I was doing Bedikas Kovitz right now, my non-Jewish neighbor would think I'm doing Kishuv here. Very dangerous to go into those holes if you know this at the beginning of Psachim. Anyway, so right?
Does it help? I'm asking.
I think I'm doing okay, Adam. You could use that for your own purposes. He says the following. So if he was Kovres Meso before the Regel, then Batlu Vimenu Gzera Shiva. Okay. Now what happens? Shmona Yomim Kodim LeRegel. Oh, now what happens? He buried his deceased 8 days before the Regel. And Batla Mimenu Gzera Shloshim. So that means that once he's Mekayim on the 8th day, Miktzas HaYom, and he abstains from cutting his hair, and that day is Erev Yontiv, he can now already cut his hair. Abba Shol Omer, afilim lo siper kodem l'regel. The Chachamim required that he had to cut his hair before the regel. Right? Let's go back to the Chacham for a moment. Im lo siper erev haregel, also l'saper achar haregel. Abba Shol Omer, again, we're not going to get into all the details here because we don't have time, but just to get the general concept here. Abba Shol Omer, afil lo siper kodem haregel, mutal l'saper achar haregel. And why? My time at Abba Shol, mishum de kasaver shvi ola lekanu lekan. So if Erev Regel is day 7 of his Avelus, then you have Miktzas HaYom KeKulo of Shiva, and now immediately after Shiva terminates with Miktzas HaYom in the morning of day 7, he begins what? He begins Shloshim. So Yom HaShvi B'tchilaso, the beginning of Yom HaShvi, is Ololo L'Siyam HaShiva. Because of Miktzas HaYom KeKulo, it's as if he completed his Shiva. Now he gets the second half of that same day 7. Uktsaso Hasheni, the second half of day 7, Ola Miktzas ha shloshim. It's already a kiyum of shloshim, such that now he's already observed shloshim, and as a result, we're going to apply regel to be mevatel shloshim. Regel mevatel gzeres hashloshim. So the Gemara says that the only way we can understand Abba Shol, in which case one day could be the last day of Shiva and the first day of Shloshim, is if we apply the principle of Rabbi Yossi. And Rabbi Yossi says that once his Miktzas HaYom KeKulo and his Zava, and she was Nikia in the morning of day 7, then even if she sees Dam sometime during the balance of day 7, she is not so serious. Why? Because we applied Miktzas HaYom KeKulo. But according to the Chachamim, who disagree with Rabbi Yossi, and they have a stira if she sees Dam at the end or during the balance of day 7, and therefore she goes back to start counting Zayin Nikiyim from the beginning. According to that Shita, Abba Shol is incorrect. So what's the connection between the two? So again, Rabbi Yossi, I don't know if you're able to, by some miracle, to see the text here. Are you able to?
Our phones are lit up. It's easier.
Okay, so if you can, take a look at a paragraph at the end of page Kuf Chaf Aleph, the Efshar. Do you see that? Shenechlaku begeder Miktzas HaYom. So the machlokus between Abba Shol and the Chachamim, and the machlokus between Rabbi Yossi and the Chachamim, depends upon two definitions of Miktzas HaYom. Ha'im ha'kavana shekol Miktzas HaYom hu Yom mitzad atzmo, meaning everything in here is in the Miktzas HaYom, and that collapses the entire day into the Miktzas HaYom. Imkain efshel lechalek yom echad kilu em shnei yomim. We could count day 7 as if it was 2 different days. Why? Because we consider everything at the beginning of day 7 in the kfitza to be day 7, and then the rest of the day I can collapse it into another moment of the day and consider it the beginning of what? Of shloshim. So that's one definition. O akavana, or we're going to use the pull-down theory. She'im noag halacha b'Miktzas HaYom nechshav ki'ilu noag b'kulo. So we have to assume that he was knowing the entire day. Well, if he was knowing the entire day, that's a day of Shiva. It cannot be the day of Shloshim. Shloshim only begins where Shiva ends. And also, we're now going to begin to understand why Stira, according to the Chacham of Rabbi Yossi, will be sosa the entire 7 days of Nikiyim, because we only assumed that the Nikiyus of the morning of the 7th day was a Nikiyus of the entire day. But we can't make that assumption if she had a Re'iyah Soseres. V'imkeni efshel lechalek yom echad kilu hu shnei yomim. And all this is based on Rebbe Chanan, not Rebbe Chanan the Baal HaTosfos, but Rebbe Chanan Wasserman, which you'll see on page Kuf Chaf if you turn backwards on the left column. Ubekovetz ha'oros, bir ha'machlokes, the machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and Chacham, whether there's a Riyah Soseres on day 7, after she already was Toveles, Shenechleku begeder, there are two definitions of Miktzas HaYom KeKulo. Rabbi Yossi sover. Okay, let's see if we can figure this out with the lights out. Meaning, if we couldn't see the text, Rabbi Yossi is going to say that what are we doing? We're collapsing everything into that Miktzas HaYom, and that Miktzas HaYom gives you the entire day, and therefore there's no such thing as stira. Let's see if we got it right. Shekol Miktzas HaYom hu keilu yom b'fnei atzma. Right, every section of the day in which he was Mekayim Nikiyus, Lachenim Shamra Miktzas HaYom b'Nikiyus, it doesn't matter whether she sees Dam afterwards, but Tchilas HaYom is considered the entire day. So it's not like Fitza of traveling all the way to the destination. Kevin Miktzas HaYom Chashuv Ki Yom Shalem. It's considered like a full day.
Who said you need a full day?
Well, you need Zayin Nikiyim.
No, you need a count. You need to count 7. on 7 different days. I mean,
Uh,
what?
It's
Yeah,
7 days of the Kiyus, no?
She didn't count a
the
whole day.
Safra Shiva. I mean, she has to count 7 days.
Right.
Who says
But
you
each day
need-
has to be Yom Naki.
But who says
Right.
it needs to be a full day? Yeah, it's
Ah.
the same thing.
Counting,
You- I mean,
the days
the-
have to be cut.
You don't have to call it they need the full day. The point is you don't need a full day. You know,
So I think what you're saying, Daniel, is going back to the explanation of the Yad Meir in the Radbaz. If someone could tell me what time it is, just at
22.
22?
Yeah.
Okay. So the Yad Meir was the one who said that the Torah defines Yomim. And he says that once you touch on a part of the day, it's as if you were Makayim it during the entire day.
I'm just saying every case is different. Sometimes you need a full period of time, sometimes you don't. And regardless of
Right.
regardless of what Miktzas Yom KeKulo does for us, could be in certain areas of halacha we need full days, and certain times we just
Right.
need
So he's saying, the Yad Meir in the Radbaz, that it's logical to assume that when the Torah talks about Yomim, it means that once you touch on the Yom,
you have a day.
somehow it expands not expands in the sense of befall, as if he was Mekayim the entire Yom, but rather the entire day collapses into that Miktzas HaYom. In other words, she was Shomeres Nikius on that Miktzas HaYom. That's enough to consider the Yom as a Yom Naki. And I think what Rabbi Chanan is now adding is that based on that, we understand the Shita of Rabbi Yossi.
Mhm.
Why? Because Rabbi Yossi is going to say you already have that day as a Yom Naki. And the halacha says that you've already counted that 7th day as the 7th day of Zayin Akiyim. The fact that she had a Re'iyah later is irrelevant because she's already fulfilled the minyan of Zayin Akiyim. So that's going to be Rabbi Yossi. Okay, now we get to Rabbanan. Now for Rabbanan Sovrim, Shemiktzas HaYom mitzad atzmo eino klum. So what's the operation and the mechanics of Miktzas HaYom KeKulo? Ella shemiktzas HaYom mitoch Yom Sholim b'Nikius nechshav gam bi oso hamiktzas kilu himshich. That's what he called greira, if you remember that word. Al kol hayom b'Nikius. So we want to assume that it's as if she had an entire day of Nikius. And here I think there's a printing mistake, in my humble opinion. It should say Kaviyachol Sofo al Shem Tchilasa. That's what I think it should say, not al Shem Sofo. It should say Sofo al Shem Tchilasa, meaning that the Sof is now an extension of the Tchila. Extension meaning we're pulling it down. Misyachasim, this is the halachic principle here. Keilu choya gam behemshech kimo b'tchilasa. Keilu. I mean, you have to underline the word keilu. I mean, we can, fantasize as if she had a full day of Yom Naki, but that's just a fantasy. In Befal Nistar B'Hemshecho, you can't say Befal she actually was considered as if she had a whole day of Nikius, because Nistar B'Hemshecho. And therefore, you can't say that Sofo Nichshav or Nikral Shem Tchilaso, when between Tchilaso and Sofo, she had a stira, and it was not a Yom Naki. Lo Shaykh Laduno Ki'ilu Hoya B'Nikius Neged Masha Hi B'Mitzias. You can't say Ki'ilu, again, the word Ki'ilu, this halachic imagination that it's as if it was a Yom Naki from beginning to end. And that's what you need, because we go through every part of the day, and each part of the day has to be part of Naki. And therefore, since she had a Re'iyah, therefore it's not possible to say Ki'ilu Hayom Naki. And now, again, we're running a little bit short on time, but I want to show you something fascinating here on page Kuf Chaf Beis, which is the last page I think you have. And thanks again to Howie for doing this work, because my photography is thumbs down. He says here, Huva bi Otzer HaGaonim, Nishal l'Rav Haigon. So if you fast forward towards the end of that paragraph, 4 lines up before the end, and he quotes various Achronim to interpret Rav Haigon, Kavanas Rav Haihi, Kishem Shebeshabbos v'Yontif. Now, this is such a klutz kasha, but it's a beautiful kasha. Why don't we apply Miktzas Yom KeKulo on Shabbos and Yontif? I observe the Shabbos in the morning. It's as if, right? That would be really fascinating, right? I fasted in the morning of Yom Kippur, and that's it. That's good enough, right? So he says there, if Haigaon holds that Kishem Shebes Shabbos v'Yontiv lo shayach lomer Miktzas Hayom KeKulo. Why not? Why can't we apply Miktzas Hayom KeKulo on Shabbos? Mishum, okay, this is already kind of brisk, I don't know if it's brisk or maybe it's dvinsk or maybe simcha, but shekol rega yeshbo kedusha Shabbos v'Yontiv. No, it's every moment of the day is vested with kedusha and generates kedusha, which generates an isur malach of him ha-mechayeves, or I would say oseres v'isur malach. So therefore, every part of the day is a separate entity. It's not like what we said at the outset, which was the Yad, whatever you call him, Yad Meir, what's he called? The Yad Meir, that we have this metaphysics in which we see, we imagine that that a day is indivisible. Do you remember that? That every part of the day is integrated into an entity which is indivisible, which is called a Yom, and that's Miktzas Hayom KeKulo. No, we can't say that on Shabbos. We cannot collapse the Shabbos into, one entity, because Shabbos is made up of continuous particles. Each particle of the day generates its own Isur Shabbos. And therefore, Tisha B'Av, the same thing will apply. I don't know why I mentioned Tisha B'Av and not Yom Kippur, but every month of Tisha B'Av is a day of Tisha B'Av. And every moment generates its own Isurei Achilo or Isurei Inui.
I think the kasha by Tisha B'Av is that we know we apply by Avelus. So why not develop Tisha B'Av?
Exactly.
So both say, how many minutes do we have left?
Exactly with the
2 minutes.
Of the Yad Meir.
Again,
Yom Kippur,
we're accepting the Yad Meir with the following limitation. The Yad Meir is willing to say that the day is indivisible as one entity, but not in the case of Kedushas Hayom. When there's Kedushas Hayom, the Kedushas Hayom is generated by every single particle, every single part of the day. But I want to finish the shir, and this is sort of a little bit emotional for me, with Rav Kahaneman Zatzal, the Panovich of Rav, which you'll see on the bottom of Kuf Chaf Bet on the right column. And again, I have to write a letter to the Masifta for, and never in a million years would I know about this Rav Kahaneman. And he says the following. He said, why is it that in Nido we need 7 days, complete 7 days? There's no Miktzas Hayom KeKulo until she leaves the status of a Nido and she can be Matar herself. Whereas in Zava there's a din of what? Of Miktzas Hayom KeKulo. And he differentiates here. Again, I'm going to give my terminology a little bit different than what appears here on the page, between a hefta of Yom and a Maisa Gav. In other words, when the Torah says that this situation itself generates Tumah, meaning the Nidus generates Tumah, and it's not the Maisa of Re'iyas HaNida, for example, even though she saw Dam, let's say on day 1 at 1 o'clock, and an hour later she didn't see any Dam, she's still a Nida for the entire 7 days. So it means that the Torah creates a Tumah of Nida. She has a Shem Nida which lasts for a full 7 days. We can't shorten it at all. Masha Enke, where there's a Maisa Gavra, for example, the case of Zava, where the Torah says that she should do a Bedika and a Shmira B'Nekius, then with a Maisa Gavra, we could say that once that Maisa Gavra overlaps and spills into day 7, she already has that Maisa Gavra, that Kiyum of Nekius, as a result of her action. So let's just see if we can stretch it for another minute or two, we'll see it inside. He says the following. He says, Masha Nida, on the bottom right column, Mea Torah, Leos Tmea Ad Sof Shivas Yomim Miriyasa, Eino Machma Shari'iyas Hadam. There's not an action here called a Re'iyah. It's not like an event. If it's an event, you can spill that event over to Miktzas Hayom on day 7, but here it's not an event. She'im tu Masa Imachmas Re'iyah, if you will argue that it's because of the Re'iyah as an event, as an Iruah, then Hoyset Tzricha Leos Tmea Mi Regashe Pascha Liros Dam Od Shivas Yamin. Maybe every time there's a new Re'iyah, maybe she should get another 7 days. Ella hagdara benida shatora omer misharo adam nechshava lenida ad shivas yomim. It's like a chalashem tumen gavra. She's a gavra tmeya for 7 days, and it doesn't matter whether she sees or she doesn't see. In kain ad sofayom arehi nida. The Torah says that her status as a nida continues for 7 days. Once the first re'iyah generates a shem nida, the shem nida extends for 7 days. Gam b'yom hashvi nichal b'shivas yomim. So there's no Miktzas Hayom. Masha enkim bezava hagdari sheish din leisha tmeya zava lishmar. I would underline the word lishmar. Lishmar now becomes an irua or a maisa. She does the shmira of shivas yom b'tara. When we came into Miktzas Hayom KeKulo miyad achar shenichlas Miktzas Hayom, already she was makayim the din of shmira, and therefore we can consider the entire day as if she had done a shmira. And if you have time, because I see we ran out of time, there's a Machna Frayim here later on the page. I think he also, even though he was probably 150 years before Rav Kahaneman, he also, I think, is machalik in the same kind of way, if I understand it correctly. L'gabi Nazirus, Kevon Sha'odam Kavanaso L'kabel Olav Lios Kadosh Shloshim Yom, Im Kain Miyad Kishenog B'Kedusha Ad Miktzas Yom Shloshim, in other words, he accepted him on himself to be Makayim Nazirus. Nazirus is a kumvaseh. It's a kiyum of his kedusha. And once again, if he spills into day 30 and he was Noe Kedusha on day 30, we can consider it as if he was Noe Kedusha for the entire day 30. I don't think this has anything to do with the Chakir of Rabbi Chanan that we had above. Yom Kol HaYom, v'chein lo metame l'meskol. L'gabi what about a neder? This is a pella. In neder, we don't say Miktzas Hayom KeKulo. If a person takes a neder, then he has to observe the entire time period of the neder. Im adam neder shelo yelech lebeis chaver shloshim yom, im yelech lebeis chaver be'emtza yom, hareu over al nidram. Because here, he basically what he does is he doesn't take upon himself a kiyum of the neder, but rather he takes upon himself an isur neder. And the isur's neder is stretched out and incorporates 30 days or whatever period of time he took. And therefore, there's no Miktzas Hayom KeKulo, which I think is very similar to Rav Kahaneman, although much earlier than Rav Kahaneman. And now he has a sefer called Nachlas Yoshua, I'm not sure who he is, and he claims an unbelievable, when he takes of 30 days, he has in mind the full 30 days. L'chein v'adam shenazar stam nazirus hana omri kevan shedinei nazirus b'furashim b'Torah vadei kavanaso he ligzar b'nazirus shekas v'Torah. And in this case, we would not apply Miktzas Hayom KeKulo. Do you hear this unbelievable chiddush? Kavanas haTorah he sheyinog minig nazirus ad sheikones liyom hashloshim. He says the following. Right? He doesn't say Hareini Nazir, and then the Torah takes over and says, well, 30 days, and if you were Makayim your Nazirus in part of those 30 days, that's enough. Miktzas Hayom KeKulo. But instead he says Hareini Nazir Shloshim Yom. Says the Nachlas Yoshua, if he says Hareini Nazir Shloshim Yom, he's not taking upon himself the Nazirus as the Torah designed Nazirus, but like any neder, the way he wants the neder and he intends the neder to be chal, and the neder is chal for entire 30 days. Could you imagine this, Rabosai? The Nachlas Yoshua probably lived 100 years ago, I'm just guessing, completely revolutionizes our understanding of Miktzas Hayom KeKulo and Nazir. And he says that Miktzas Hayom KeKulo and Nazir only applies if he says Hareini Nazir. But if he says Hareini Nazir Shloshim Yom, then we don't apply Miktzas Hayom KeKulo, because then it's classified and defined as what? As a neder. Okay, Rabosai, thank you so much. And, we have to rethink this whole business here, because I see that Tuesday mornings here in Reshit Gancha is not just simple.
The light's still on. The light on your phone.
Oh, it's still on?
Yeah.
Okay.
I looked up the Yav Meir, and his name was David Meir Fish, and he was the Av based in a town called Berzon.
Berzon, meaning in Galicia. Yeah, not
Oh,
related to Berzon. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah, we don't have a
Steve.
quick second.
the lights went out here. We're in bad shape. So I'm going to close down. And if you give me 5 minutes, we'll pick it up here. I'm using a flashlight to read the text. Okay, then?